this part of the discussion, we take a closer look at the future of transport, electrification, the evolution of batteries, capability and skills, and Anna and Wisk's desire to support the growth of an ecosystem that is enduring and sustainable. What was also interesting is the unique position and competitive advantage of New Zealand in being able to bring it all together and actually decide the regulatory frameworks that will govern some of these new technologies globally. Where I want to start is by looking forward 10 years into the future, and then I'll bring us back to what you guys are doing. But if you look forward 10 years, what does the future of domestic transport look like?
Look, I think we can see that we are at the beginning of an evolution of transport towards electrification, both on land and in the skies. That's partly a response to, a growing need to think about the climate, but it's also just, the evolution of technology. The battery technology has developed so significantly over the past decade. Our ability to, develop autonomous vehicles has, just grown exponentially over the past decade. So we are in a different space, as a people, in terms of how we get ourselves from A to B. And in 10 years' time, I think we will see a kind of that evolution starting to really show itself in our day-to-day lives. We will have more electric vehicles on the ground of various types, and there'll be, that creates quite a few changes in the way we manage energy, the way we actually purchase energy. The thing of having your home charger, how will that be wrapped up in your energy bill, and who manages that? Or will it be something that, for example, you buy your car and you get the energy package with it. There'll be some real significant changes in the way that we perceive, that aspect. I think the other thing with that energy delivery is that you've got battery technology, and for most batteries, they will have a residual amount left in them even after they've stopped being useful for a car, or in our case, an aircraft. And you can actually use that, like the Tesla power banks. It starts to become quite, a realistic option for actually decentralising power generation. Individuals can have their own, equivalent of a power bank running their house and feeding back into the grid, for example. Solar energy, wind energy, all of these alternative energies start to become sort of much more ubiquitous across your marketplace. So there's going to be quite a bit of disruption there. And within that 10 years, we will have these aircraft, electric aircraft, both for longer sort of routes, but also for those commuter routes. We can't build more roads globally. And so really the only place that we can go is 3D up. And so for places where traffic is a really significant time waster. I think in America they lose about an hour and a half on average a day, if not more, just in terms of commuting. So those are significant productivity issues for communities, let alone the sitting in traffic in a gas guzzler. So actually having these electric aircraft available as an option as part of that sort of evolution of transport.
Yeah. And is vehicle ownership is still a big part
That's
of
a really good point.
The equation in this sort of future in 10 years' time, or is it your what are they calling it?
Ride share.
Share and vehicle as a service or something.
Look, in the focus grouping that we have in that younger age group, obviously younger than me, but younger age group, the perception of car ownership is not as great. they don't have the same connection with a particular car brand or, even with the ownership concept. They're very happy to have the rideshare type or car share type access. So I think that is a significant change, is that we're becoming more collective in our use of transport options. You just see it with micro-mobility, right? With the, takeoff of scooters and, bikes and all sorts of different kind of micro-mobility, is that we are very happy to swap quite quickly into different forms of transport and sort of see that as an ecosystem. So I think that gives huge opportunities for different types of transport to actually evolve into this, into the market.
With the taxi, or the pilotless taxi, how does that, will there be a number of locations around a city where these taxis land and then take off, and how do you see that?
Look, the thing that I say to people, this is not going to be the Jetsons within 10 years, possibly even 20 years, because, really this is bringing a new technology into the ecosystem. We've got a lot of things to work out as a community as to how to operate that. Very much the way we see it is that there will be essentially, highways or railroads in the sky. There will be a particular sort of track that will be from an A to B point. You will get yourself to the A point, you will be taken to the B point, and then you take micro-mobility or your rideshare to your final destination. So it's not point to point, but it is a significant part of that journey. So, for example, it might be over water, because we know that, for example, bridges often create, a log jam in commuter traffic. You just have to have one accident on the Auckland Harbour Bridge and, you've got a 2-hour wait. So, if you can have an electric air taxi that's actually taking you from A to B over that water, it's going to be faster, and that's going to be a benefit to you. The other one is, from city to airport. That's another, it's sort of routes that are really useful to people and are actually going to make a significant difference to the amount of time that they take to get somewhere. So, as we say, it's less time getting there and more time being there.
And you would see eventually at some point, the taxi you're working on at the moment is a 2-person.
It is.
And at some point it would be, a 4-person or a 6-person?
So it's in terms of the industry that is emerging around electric vehicles, and we're in electric vertical takeoff and landing, so we don't require a runway. So we're essentially like a helicopter taking off and landing, and then we fly on the wing. So it's actually got wings and it's got 12 lift fans on it. So it lifts up and then it flies on the wing. For a vehicle like that, there's a number of different versions of that globally. There's enough, and they are all sort of taking a slightly different approach. But the idea is that all of them are looking to be electric or hybrid. And it's really, at the moment, the strength of the batteries to actually lift the passengers and the aircraft that is inhibiting how big they are. So as that battery technology improves, these aircraft will get bigger, and we will actually see larger and larger aircraft. But it is really the start of the electric aviation evolution to the point where we will be taking these sorts of vehicles, from Auckland to Wellington ultimately sometime in the future.
Wow.
Yeah.
And if you think of where we are right now in Wellington, what do you think some of the other opportunities this development or this innovation will open up? For example, I think of towns and cities that all of a sudden will be accessible.
Absolutely.
Marlborough.
They'll be 20 minutes away.
Yeah, 20 minutes away.
Yeah.
So there's that. Are there other opportunities you think this sort of technology will open up?
Yeah, look, I think at the very beginning, a technology like this creates ecosystem opportunities. So you essentially have a pipeline of talent that you have to create. So, we have aircraft maintenance engineers, but they're not your standard aircraft maintenance engineers because they're working on an electric aircraft. That's a whole different capability. We have flight test engineers, but they are flight test engineers for an electric aircraft. That's a different capability. So you're actually developing a capability within your economy that is quite different and is transferable across electric cars and electric aircraft. There's transferable skills. So you're developing that capability, and in this industry it is growing extremely fast. There is a huge amount of investment going on in it. Car manufacturers, aircraft manufacturers, they're all piling into the industry trying to get a foothold. It's not going anywhere. It is something that is going to happen. The beauty of it from New Zealand's perspective is that we're actually at the forefront at the moment of this industry, partly because of the work that we're doing, but also because of some of the other companies that have come in off the back of our presence here. And they are doing everything from, we're passenger vehicle, but there's agricultural drones or agricultural aircraft, there's emergency, there's mapping. So you develop an ecosystem around these sorts of technologies that is there for with all of the associated kind of service providers, as Rocket Lab has, that actually start to create an industry with a whole lot of opportunities for an economy to become more in that high value, skills-based economy rather than, our traditional economy around agrarian and primary production.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I've heard you talk about a number of times, and I thought, yeah, that's fantastic, which is if Wisk was to uplift at some moment and
disappear.
Yeah. What would you leave behind?
Yeah.
And it's what you're talking about, which is this ecosystem of not just supporting companies, but companies that I guess have spun out of involvement with you and others, and just a thriving sort of ecosystem. It is what we're seeing all over New Zealand at the moment around some key entrepreneurs and companies. I've talked to Sean Edlin of Dotterel Technology recently, who came out of Lanzatech, rolled out of that, and then has had a couple of other startups since then, and his whole team there are ex-Lanzatech or very closely connected. And so you see that snowballing of the snowballing that happens, and I think it's quite exciting.
It is exciting, but I think it's also about ensuring. So one of the things that we've worked very hard on is, for example, we are testing in the South Island, and we have a very good partnership with Ngāi Tahu. Part of that partnership is around, really encouraging their young leaders and their young people to think about STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, math, as real options. And they have a group that comes to Mountain View, to Silicon Valley, where we're based, every year, and they come to our facility, and then they also connect with the team down in Tekapo. And that gives them a connection as to, this is happening in New Zealand, but this is also what you can create. And we know that, just exciting, if I can excite one or two of those kids to think, I could be, a Stanford PhD and do something extraordinary, or I could do something at home around this, then that would be fantastic. That will actually help New Zealand in the future. I've worked with a lot of innovative companies. I've worked with companies that have come to New Zealand to test, and one of my key goals throughout this has really been to embed some of the benefits in New Zealand, because so many times we see, companies come to New Zealand, invest, but it's like a hand in sand. When they disappear, there's nothing left. And so I really do believe that what we're doing at the moment in terms of the partnerships, the internships we've got going, the work we're doing with the universities to identify, local talent to actually train up and bring on board, but also the gap analysis of what we have to actually continue to work on to really make sure our young people are fully available to take advantage of these opportunities. Those are the sorts of things that will ensure that New Zealand is well placed to continue to take advantage of this, very, very valuable new industry that's being built up. And we have a competitive advantage in it that, who knew?
Yeah. Well, why don't you talk to us a bit about that competitive advantage? But actually, before you do, I think the point around exposing young people to this as, hey, here's an exciting option that you might not otherwise have known about, and you're it's not just it's STEM, but here's a specific example of the application of those skills, and it's important. It's important to the world and to our future transport and energy and climate demands. I was just kind of thinking of as a child, why did I go into law?
Why did you go into law?
Well, I didn't know any scientists or see that. So
as an option.
Yeah.
And that's what we find is that, you can just to have exposure to the opportunities is often really helpful for kids just to think a little bit more broadly. Even if they just keep math as one of their subjects through to year 13, that opens up a whole lot of options for them in the future, because we know they are going to change careers several times in their lifetimes nowadays. So just to be able to give them that sense that these things are important because they give you a whole lot of options and a whole lot of really exciting options. It's amazing to watch those young ones really sort of connect with what is possible. And the other thing I am really, one of the things that we're working with Ngāi Tahu on is very much around understanding what our communities, and not just Ngāi Tahu, but communities in general, what are our communities going to want from this technology? We have this opportunity with the air. It is our last resource, largely untapped. And, one could argue that we haven't done, we've got some room for improvement around how we've managed the land and water resources. So this is a real opportunity to say, with the air resource, how are we going to manage that well? What do we as a community expect from that management, and what do we want to see and not want to see? Because I think that's a really important part of these new technologies.
Yeah. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that? You talk about airspace as an untapped resource and a competitive advantage.
It is.
Could you maybe explain that a little bit about what are you talking about there?
Sure. So a couple of things. The reason that New Zealand has a competitive advantage in this particular, in the sort of the eVTOL industry, or in this new sort of aviation, electric aviation and autonomous vehicle aircraft area, is that we have some specific regulations that allow for testing in New Zealand. Everything in New Zealand is as stringent and as safe as anywhere, in the world, and we have very, very strict regulations. Our CAA has been doing a really good job about making sure that we are safe, I know. So there is a particular competitive advantage, though, that we have around some progressive rule parts that allow for experimental aircraft like ours to test safely, and we have to follow huge numbers of rules, and it's very, very stringent, but it is there in a way that it isn't in other jurisdictions. So when our company actually was looking for a place to come, because they knew that that they weren't going to necessarily be able to do it in the US, they looked at a whole matrix of innovation elements that they were looking for, and they went round about 7 or 8 jurisdictions. And that matrix had everything from IP law to ease of doing business to the credible civil aviation authority, the ability to actually, talk through a certification process for a completely new vehicle that nobody's ever seen before, and having a marketplace that is you can learn from. It's a Western economy that is, a lot of the learnings are transferable and scalable. So when they did that, and they did that global search, they came up with New Zealand being the top of the pile. And that's why they came to New Zealand and they established the company here. That competitive advantage has increased because we have a thing called the Innovative Partnerships Program in MB. And that is an opportunity to take a whole-of-government approach to these projects and these big issues, which basically means that we talk to the government with all of the agencies pretty much in the room to say, hey, look, this is what we're trying to do, this is the social engagement side, this is the certification side, and this is the airspace side, and how are we going to figure out this very difficult 3D puzzle to actually get to an end result that we can all be proud of, and that is safe, primarily safe, and that it is successful for everybody. And the social engagement I've talked a little bit about with, working with community, working with business, working with Ngāi Tahu, ensuring that we have those good partnerships with local government and central government. The certification, we're working with civil aviation, and that's a long, slow process of verification, flying, lots of hours, just flying and proving that, that the plane does what it says, that what we say it's going to do. And then the other part of it is airspace integration, and the government has been very progressive in thinking about how do we sort of incorporate these different technologies that are being developed, whether it be agricultural drones or mapping, or how do we actually manage our airspace well. And they're taking a phased approach to that. It's considered, it's deliberative, and it actually creates the data that globally we need to understand how we're going to manage that resource well. So last year the government announced the airspace integration trials. That is an opportunity to test in a very structured way particular technologies in New Zealand in a safe way that allows the community and the government and the industry to work together to work out how can these particular platforms, is what we call them, be integrated into airspace.
Are we moving fast enough as a country, or are we moving as fast as we possibly can?
I think we're moving as fast as we possibly can, and I think New Zealand is right at the forefront of it. And the other jurisdictions are collaborative with New Zealand about what we're doing in this space. The FAA is very interested. We had we've been in discussions with the UK CAA. They are watching with great interest as to what's happening in New Zealand. They see the approach as something that they would love to do, but they can't because they're in much more complex environments. So, in a way, it's not that New Zealanders are guinea pigs in any way whatsoever. It's just we have this competitive advantage to actually determine what this industry looks like globally, and that's pretty exciting.
It is really exciting, and from a council perspective also, your company and what you're doing, not only is very important, but you're working across multiple areas of interest to the council. Future of work. So we talked a lot about capability and skill development. Very much in the our interest in trade, in terms of the future, what we call it, the future of trade, or new trade narrative, which is around digital trade and innovation, that kind of thing. And then of course data, which is how do you how do you govern this massive hoovering up of data? And, that's, your vehicles, and, I don't know how many sensors they'll have on them, but there'll be quite a number. Plus, visual, you got to be looking out and seeing where you're flying. So you're collecting a lot of information into there. I know you've had an interest in the 5G area, and where is that at?
Look, I think from our perspective, we are obviously in the situation we're autonomous, so we don't have a pilot on board, so sensors are going to be a significant part of how we operate, but as is likely, having particular radar or air traffic control support as well. So that's why we talk about corridors. The corridors in the sky is it actually creates a safe space for us to operate. A lot of the technology that goes into those sensors, whether it be autonomous cars or autonomous aircraft, is still being developed and is still in the process of being certified. And so, those are things that still have to be developed and certified over time. I guess from the data perspective, we are very clear about the need for security of data and data transfer, regardless of what it is. And a little bit like knowing what you want out of that airspace resource and how you want to manage that. We are very strong advocates for New Zealand and other communities having a very clear sense of how we want to manage our data and what gets shared and what doesn't get shared, and having very clear expectations around that, and really encouraging New Zealand to actually have a very active conversation about that, because as you say, at the moment there are a lot of different resources that are picking up that data and using it in all sorts of different ways. Some of it we know about and some of it we don't.
I think we need to wrap it up there. We've gone long over time, but it's been a really, I think, fascinating discussion starting out with COVID and just, that discussion around what are going to be the ongoing impacts of that, and particularly around security of supply chains. I think that was a part of that discussion that I think was really, really interesting. And then into really the future of transport, where what you're working on fits into a sort of an integrated system of different transport modes, and it's just such a exciting, I think, and interesting area, and it can't come soon enough, I think, to address. We're so focused on building more roads, and I like driving my car on the road, but if that's going to be redundant, 10 or 15 years, and we spent $6 billion, whatever it is, on building this new highway, that's just silly. But anyway.